Now it goes better. This WWV signal, that is actually 3 cycles of a high-frequency signal. And he knew what that frequency was. I don't know what it was. But anyhow, when you hear 3 cycles of a signal, it goes click. All you hear is a click. But if you strung the thing out, you'd hear a tone. And he knew what that frequency was. So he built an audio filter so that nothing but that frequency would pass through. WWV also put out 2 tones. There's a 440A tone and a 1000 hertz tone, which basically is on steady at the time when these clicks are on. He built 2 more filters to filter out 440 or 1000. Take those out to ground. So you connect all these filters up, you plug that in. Now the only thing that comes out the end of this thing is the click. He tied this to another graphic ammeter, which was going to write on the same paper as the interferometer graphic ammeter. So now, every second, another pen would go click on this thing. Now I don't have to sit there with my little ballpoint, and of course it's much more accurate. He dragged in another receiver to see what we hear on 20 megahertz, but it turns out he made 40 megahertz was the correct choice. That was the one that really sounded the best. But there was a signal that came on there. It was a tone, and then it gave out some kind of a CW signal, and it identified itself WHI or something like that. I don't know what the call letters were, but it identified itself with some call letters. And this thing came on just before, it was like in between passes. And George says, I wish I knew who that was. And I said, that's WHI or whatever the call letters were. And he says, how do you know? And I said, well, they just identified in CW. He said, are you sure those are the call letters? And I says, yeah. George went over and picked up the telephone, made a phone call, and that station disappeared and never came back. I don't know who he called, but whatever it was, he got that station off the air, or whatever it was, just like that. I never heard it again. For that whole operation, it was gone. Later on, they decided that they didn't really have to be in the basement of the observatory, so people needed that space for doing their observations. And out in the hill, way outside of town, was the DF site that they were going to use for tracking our stuff. And they had a lot of room out there and so on. The only problem with it was way out of town. It wasn't like where you could walk to. By the way, I had been spending all my time there now. I was not going to classes.
Oh, really?
That's all I did. I went to the observatory, and I'd stay there until I got real tired, then I went home, quote unquote, and then I went back out to the observatory again. Now, I had no way to get out there, but by this time I got to know everybody, so people would come by and to pick me up in the car and to give me a ride out there. But then, of course, I couldn't come back until they were ready to come back. So anyway, we went out to the DF site, and we're doing basically the same thing, but by this point, almost everything was automatic. The little moving meter, that was done electronically at this point in time. It did it photographically on photographic paper instead of drawing lines with the ink. They had a better receiver out there now, better than this. Oh, by the way, I meant to mention, you know how the Doppler goes beep, 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 like that, right?
Yep.
Okay, if you have a tube-type receiver, which is what the Hammerlin Super Pro was, it tends to drift with heat. And sometimes it just tends to drift because it feels like drifting. And you get the same effect. Beep, 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 like that. So they're going to put up a Doppler receiver, which was built on much more stable equipment. I don't know if it was crystal ovens or what, but it was something where it wasn't going to drift like this thing was. And a lot of times, you'll hear it on this tape, where the signal is fading. It's not Doppler doing it, it's the receiver is drifting, and I had to grab hold of the BFO knob and give it a twist, and you hear the pitch very drastically change. Go beep, 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 beep,
yeah.
Boop, boop, boop. It had all kinds of different sounds. The other thing I wanted to make a mention, I forgot. The tape recorder that I used, it was a home type recorder, and it was running slow. It was not running a true 7.5 inches per second. So the tape that I got, when you play it back on other machines, it runs fast. I think I slowed this down to the right place, but I'm not sure. It may not be exactly right. And this tape, by the way, is the same tape. It's not a copy of the tape. It is the tape. So anyway, we went out to the DF site. Now, by now it's November. This thing was launched in October. Now it's November. The satellite is still up there. We still call it a satellite. We did not call it Sputnik. The satellite is still up there coming around, and the batteries are still good. We didn't know what they had in there for batteries. It was just because they didn't have solar cells back then. You got to remember that. No such a thing as a solar cell, no way to recharge this thing. We also, George was making some notices that its orbit is not as stable as it was. There's nothing to keep it there, and it wasn't a perfect circle to begin with, so every time its apogee and perigee and all this other stuff, it slows down, and that changes the orbit slightly. And then next time it's going to be worse again. Anyhow, George says, okay, he says, tomorrow we're going to be able to see it. It's going to be coming over at the time just before the sun comes up. And the sun is going to light it up because it'll be in the sunlight, we'll be in the dark, and we'll be able to see it. So he told us to the newspapers, and they put big articles in there. So they're going to pick me up about 4 o'clock in the morning. And we go out there, and on the way out, you see people that have been out there since midnight with their little lawn chairs. They got their sleeping bags, blankets, thermos bottles, the whole bit. They're all out there trying to keep warm. And they're hours ahead because Swenson told them it's going to happen at 5 o'clock. And the people are all out there, both sides of the streets, all the way out. Wherever we went, there were people. We got out to the DF site. And we went in the building. It was nice and warm. We had our coffee and donuts, and we're listening for Sputnik to come on the radio. And sure enough, we hear it coming, and then we go out, and it doesn't come up out of the horizon. In fact, if anybody watches these satellites today, you know, it doesn't come up. It just, all of a sudden, there it is, because it comes almost straight at you. And it was really neat. We just kind of looked to the northwest, and all of a sudden, there it is, and it's coming straight at you. And it goes overhead, and then it goes the other direction and disappears. It doesn't sink into the sky. It just kind of goes off, and it gets so small you can't see it anymore.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, it was.
Now, did it blink at all
No,
visually?
No,
It wasn't
no,
spinning
no,
with a flat side?
No, there was no flat side. This thing was round like a basketball. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's many replicas available in museums.
This is like a round ball.
Like a big basketball.
Yeah,
it was slightly larger than a basketball.
With 4 trailing antennas.
Yeah, it wasn't super big at all, and the antenna stuck out the end. Yeah, like a comet.
How many circuits of the globe had this satellite gone before you had your tape recorder set up?
Second one. We got it on the second pass.
No kidding.
Yeah, we got it on the second pass.
That's
the first pass we heard it. Well, we got our information about the launch from Radio Moscow. I don't know how many times it went around before Radio Moscow said that they launched it, but it was the second pass that we got good tracking data, the second pass around. So that would be 3 hours. Every 90 minutes that thing goes around. So 3 hours after launch, theoretically, we got good, accurate tracking data, and the only correct tracking data of the whole country.
The following is a recording of the actual tape recorded by Ken Piletic.